Think about the last conversation you had where you felt truly heard. Not just someone waiting for their turn to speak, but actually listening, actually interested in what you had to say. How did that person make you feel? Now think about the opposite. Someone who talked about themselves the whole time, who interrupted you, who made you feel invisible. The difference between those two people isn't talent, it isn't luck. It's a set of skills that can be learned. In 1936, a man named Dale Carnegie cracked the code, and what he discovered has helped over 50 million people transform their relationships, their careers, and their lives. This is everything you need to know. How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie is not a manipulation manual. It's a deep, honest study of how human beings actually work and how to connect with them in a way that's genuine, effective, and lasting. In this video, we're going through all 4 parts of the book, 27 principles in total. By the end, you'll know exactly how to handle difficult people without conflict, how to make anyone genuinely like you, how to win people over to your way of thinking, and how to lead others without them ever feeling pushed. Let's start with part 1. Principle 1. Don't criticize, condemn, or complain. It was a routine flight back from an air show in San Diego. Bob Hoover, one of America's most celebrated test pilots, was cruising in his World War II propeller plane when something went very wrong. Both engines cut out mid-flight. Hoover pulled every skill he had. He brought the plane down safely. Everyone on board survived, but the aircraft was destroyed. The investigation revealed the cause. A young mechanic at the airfield had filled the fuel tanks with jet fuel instead of aviation fuel. Now imagine the weight of that moment. Lives had been at risk. The plane was gone. The mistake was completely, inexcusably avoidable. The mechanic stood there, pale and shaking, waiting to be fired, waiting to be screamed at. Instead, Hoover walked over, put his arm around the young man's shoulder, and said, "To show you I have confidence in you, and that I know you've learned your lesson, I want you to service my plane again tomorrow." Why did Hoover respond that way? Because he understood something most people never learn about human nature. Criticism doesn't change people, it defends them. When you criticize someone, you're not triggering their logic, you're triggering their ego. And when the ego is under attack, people don't reflect, they don't improve, they justify themselves, they dig in deeper, they build walls. Psychologist B.F. Skinner proved this decades ago. Animals, and people, learn faster through reward than through punishment. Praise leads to growth. Criticism leads to resentment. Even when you're completely right, even when the person clearly made a mistake, pointing it out aggressively rarely produces change. It produces a fight. Carnegie puts it simply, any fool can criticize, condemn, and complain, and most fools do. But it takes character and self-control to be understanding and forgiving. The goal is never to win an argument. The goal is to win the person. So the next time someone makes a mistake, an employee, your partner, your child, a colleague, before you react, ask yourself, how can I show trust instead of frustration? How can I build them up instead of tearing them down? You don't have to pretend the mistake didn't happen, but you can choose how you respond to it. Hoover didn't excuse what happened. He chose a response that preserved the relationship, and that young mechanic probably worked harder for him than he ever had for anyone. So if we can't criticize, how do we actually move people to act differently? How do we motivate someone without fear or pressure? Carnegie's second principle gives us the answer, and it's the most underused tool in every relationship. Principle 2. Give honest and sincere appreciation. George Johnson was a manager with a problem. One of his employees, we'll call him Tom, was consistently underperforming. Low output, low energy, low engagement. The standard response would have been obvious. Sit Tom down, list everything he's doing wrong, give him a performance improvement plan. Johnson tried something different. He called Tom into his office and said, "Tom, I've been paying attention, and I want you to know, I've noticed your analytical instincts, the way you think through problems. Those qualities are rare, and this team needs more of that." Tom was stunned. In the following weeks, his performance transformed. Not because of a warning, not because of a threat, because someone finally saw him. There is one craving that sits above food, safety, money, above almost everything else: the desire to feel important. Freud called it the desire to be great. William James, one of the founders of modern psychology, called it the deepest principle in human nature. Every person you meet is carrying that hunger, the hunger to be seen, to be valued, to be told their presence matters. And almost no one feeds it. Here's the key distinction Carnegie makes. Flattery comes from the lips. Appreciation comes from the heart. Flattery is, "You look great today." Appreciation is, "The way you handled that difficult client last week, I genuinely respect that." One is empty, the other changes people. Starting today, make it a practice. Find one specific, genuine thing to appreciate in someone and say it out loud. Not "good job," not "you're great," but something specific. The way you stayed calm in that meeting, that's not easy, and it made a difference. Specificity is what separates appreciation from flattery. Specificity says, "I was actually paying attention to you." So now we know not to criticize. We know how powerful sincere appreciation is. But here's the question that determines whether any of this actually works. Are we thinking about what we want or about what they want? Principle 3 is where everything comes together. Principle 3, arouse in others an eager want. Quick question, what's your favorite food? Maybe it's pizza or noodles or something sweet. Now, imagine you're going fishing. Would you bait the hook with your favorite food? Of course not. Fish don't want what you want. Fish want worms, so you give them worms. Lloyd George, Prime Minister of Britain during World War I, once described his approach to leadership with a single line: "I learned that it is necessary to bait the hook to suit the fish." Simple, obvious, and yet, in almost every conversation, every negotiation, every relationship, we forget it completely. We talk about what we want, we explain our reasons, we make our case, and we wonder why people aren't moving. Carnegie is direct about this. Of course you're interested in what you want, but no one else is. The rest of us are just like you. We're interested in what we want. This isn't cynicism, it's just human nature. People don't take action because you need something. They take action because there's something in it for them. Emotion drives behavior. Logic justifies it after. If you want someone to do something, your job isn't to convince them. Your job is to help them want to do it. Before your next important conversation, whether it's a pitch, a request, a negotiation, or even a difficult personal talk, stop and ask yourself 2 questions. What does this person actually want, truly want? And how does what I'm offering help them get it? When you genuinely answer those questions and lead with those answers, people stop feeling pushed. They feel understood. They feel respected, and suddenly, they're open. You don't stop caring about what you want. You just present it in a way that makes them want it too. So now you have the 3 foundations. Don't criticize. Give genuine appreciation. Think in terms of what others want. These shift how you approach people, but part 2 goes deeper. It answers the question everyone is secretly asking. How do I actually make people genuinely like me? Carnegie has 6 answers, and they're not what most people expect. Principle 1, become genuinely interested in other people. Howard Thurston was the greatest magician of his era. Night after night, he packed theaters across the country. Over the course of his career, he performed for 60 million people and earned millions of dollars doing it. Now, Thurston wasn't the only skilled magician around. There were others who knew the same tricks, others who had trained just as hard. So what made him different? Before every single show, Thurston would stand in the wings, look out at the audience filling the seats, and say to himself, "I love my audience. I am grateful for every single person out there." He didn't just perform for them, he genuinely cared about them, and people felt it. That's the principle Carnegie is pointing at. You cannot fake real interest. But when it's genuine, when you're truly curious about someone's life, their struggles, their opinions, people feel it immediately, and they are drawn to you because of it. Carnegie puts it this way: you can make more friends in 2 months by being genuinely interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get people interested in you. Read that again. 2 months versus 2 years. So the practice is simple. Remember people's birthdays. Ask questions and actually listen to the answers. Notice what matters to the people around you and bring it up the next time you see them. Not as a tactic, as a genuine expression of interest. That one shift, from trying to be interesting to being genuinely interested, changes everything about how people experience you. Principle 2. Smile. William Steinhardt was a stockbroker in New York. By his own description, he was serious, guarded, and not particularly warm. One morning, after reading Carnegie's work, he decided to try something, just for a day. He smiled. He smiled at himself in the mirror before leaving the house. He smiled at the doorman, at the cashier who handed him his coffee, at his colleagues when he walked into the office. By the end of the day, something had shifted. People were warmer with him. Conversations were easier. His wife noticed. His coworkers noticed. Even difficult client calls felt different. He kept going. After 2 months, he said he had experienced more happiness in his life than in the entire previous year. His revenue went up. Now, Carnegie is not talking about a plastic, forced smile, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes. People see through that immediately. He's talking about a real smile, the kind that says, "I'm glad you're here. You matter to me. I'm happy to see you." And here's the deeper truth. You don't always feel like smiling. Some days you're tired. Some days things aren't going well. Carnegie's answer to that: act first, feel second. When you force yourself to act warmly towards someone, the feeling follows. Our emotions respond to our actions, not always the other way around. A smile costs nothing, and very few things communicate as much. Principle 3. Remember names. James Farley grew up poor, lost his father at 10, started working young, had no particular advantages, but he became one of the most influential political figures in American history, the campaign manager who helped Franklin D. Roosevelt win the presidency. His secret was simple. He could remember 50,000 names. Not just names, he knew how to spell them. He knew details about the people attached to those names. And years later, he could greet someone he'd met once and make them feel as though they'd never left his mind. Carnegie's principle is this: a person's name is, to that person, the sweetest sound in any language. When you remember someone's name, you are saying, without words, "You were worth remembering to me. You mattered enough for me to hold on to." When you forget it, or mispronounce it, or misspell it, the message is equally clear. The technique is not complicated. When you meet someone new, repeat their name back immediately. Use it once or twice in the conversation. Write it down afterward if you need to. It takes 30 seconds of effort, and the impression it leaves lasts far longer than that. Principle 4. Be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves. At a dinner party one evening, Dale Carnegie found himself sitting next to a botanist. Carnegie was fascinated by the man. So, for most of the evening, Carnegie said almost nothing. He asked a few questions. He listened closely. He leaned in when the botanist spoke about exotic plants and rare growing conditions. At the end of the night, the botanist found the host and said, "What a remarkable conversationalist that Carnegie is." Carnegie had barely spoken. Here's what most people misunderstand about conversation. They think the goal is to say something impressive, something clever, something memorable. But the person who makes others feel truly heard, that is the person who gets remembered as magnetic. Carnegie's observation: most people listen not to understand, but to reply. They're already forming their next sentence before the other person has finished theirs. When you do the opposite, when you listen with full attention, ask thoughtful questions, and resist the urge to make it about yourself, people feel something rare. They feel seen. And people will travel a long way and stay a long time in the company of someone who makes them feel that way. The practice. In your next conversation, aim for 75% listening and 25% talking. Ask a question. Then actually wait for the full answer before you say anything else. It will feel unusual at first. That's how rarely people do it. Principle 5. Talk in terms of the other person's interests. Edward Shalluf had a bold request. He wanted the president of a major corporation to personally fund a trip for his son's Boy Scout troop. That's not a small ask, and he knew it. But before the meeting, Shalluf did his homework. He found out that this executive had once written a check for $1 million and then had the canceled check framed and hung on his office wall. It was one of his most prized possessions. So when Shalluf sat down across from this man, he didn't open with his request. He opened with the check. "I heard about that framed $1 million check. I'd love to hear the story behind it." The executive lit up. He talked about it for 20 minutes. The history, the deal, the significance. He was genuinely thrilled that someone had asked. When he finally came back to earth and realized he hadn't asked why Shalluf was there, Shalluf mentioned the trip. The executive didn't just fund one boy, he funded several. Theodore Roosevelt described this principle with a line that Carnegie loved. "The royal road to a person's heart is to talk about the things he or she treasures most." Before any important conversation, take 5 minutes and ask yourself, what does this person actually care about? What are they proud of? What do they love to talk about? Then start there. You're not abandoning your own agenda. You're finding the door that's already open. Principle 6. Make the other person feel important and do it sincerely. Look around you on any given day. The cashier at the checkout who has been on her feet for 6 hours. The delivery driver who dropped off 300 packages today. The colleague who stayed late to finish something nobody acknowledged. The server who is still smiling at the end of a long shift. Every single one of them has something genuinely admirable in them, something worth noticing. Maybe it's how they stay calm under pressure. Maybe it's the quiet professionalism in how they do a job most people take for granted. Most people walk past without seeing any of it. Carnegie's principle, the last of the 6 in this section, is the one that ties everything together. Make the other person feel important. And do it sincerely, not as a technique, not to get something in return. Because human beings are genuinely worthy of being seen, and almost no one takes the time to do it. Carnegie wrote, "If we're so selfish that we can't radiate a little happiness without trying to get something back, we deserve the emptiness that follows." The practice is straightforward. Once a day, find someone who is being overlooked. Find something genuine to appreciate about them, and say it out loud. Not a compliment designed to impress them, a real observation, something specific, something true. That's it. That is the whole principle. And the strange thing is, when you practice this consistently, something starts to shift. Not just in how people respond to you, in how you move through the world. You start looking for what's good in people instead of what's wrong with them. And that single change, that shift in attention, transforms every relationship you have. So we know how to make people like us. We know how to show genuine interest, how to listen, how to make someone feel seen and valued. But what happens when you disagree with someone? What happens when you need to change their mind and they're pushing back? That's where most people lose everything they've built. Part 3 gives you 12 principles for winning people over to your way of thinking, without ever making them feel like they lost. Principle 1. The only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it. When Dale Carnegie was young, he loved to argue. He studied logic, he debated, he jumped into every disagreement he could find, determined to prove people wrong and win the point. For years, he thought this was a strength. Then, slowly, he noticed something. The people he argued with, even when he defeated them completely, didn't change their minds. They walked away with their defenses up, their egos bruised, and their original opinions more firmly held than before. He had won the argument and lost the person. There is an old saying that Carnegie kept coming back to: "A man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still." You can out-logic someone. You can present the clearest possible case. You can win every single point in the debate, and still, if their ego is involved, they will find a way to hold on to what they already believed. So Carnegie's principle is blunt. Don't argue. Not because you're weak, because you understand what arguments actually produce. When someone disagrees with you, try this instead. Welcome the disagreement. It might be showing you something you missed. Control your first reaction. Listen to them fully before you say anything. Find whatever you genuinely agree on and start there. You can be right or you can be effective. Most of the time, you cannot be both at once. Principle 2. Show respect. Never say you're wrong. Theodore Roosevelt, one of the most confident and accomplished leaders in American history, once admitted that he was rarely certain he was right more than 75% of the time. If someone with that level of experience and judgment held that kind of humility, what does that suggest about the rest of us? And yet, in conversation after conversation, we talk as though we are certain, as though the other person is simply mistaken and just needs to be corrected. Carnegie's principle: never tell someone directly that they're wrong. Not because truth doesn't matter, but because of how the human mind actually responds to that phrase. The moment you say you're wrong, you're not engaging with their idea, you're attacking their judgment, their intelligence, their identity. And when people feel attacked, they stop thinking. They start defending. James Harvey Robinson, the psychologist, put it this way: people change their minds all the time, quietly, privately, when no pressure is being applied. But the moment someone tries to force that change, something in us resists. Not because we're certain we're right, but because our pride demands we not be seen giving in. So instead of "you're wrong," try this: I may be wrong, I frequently am. Let's look at the facts together. That one phrase disarms almost any argument. It signals respect, it signals openness, and it creates space for the other person to actually reconsider without losing face. Principle 3. If you are wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically. Carnegie was walking his dog one afternoon in a park, without a leash, against the rules. A police officer warned him. He apologized and promised to follow the rules next time. A week later, he did it again. Same park, same mistake, and the same officer appeared. Most people in that situation would stammer out an excuse, would minimize, would explain why the rule was a bit excessive anyway. Carnegie did the opposite. He walked straight toward the officer and said, "Officer, I'm guilty. I have no excuse. You warned me and I ignored you. I deserve to be fined." The officer stared at him, then shook his head and said, "You're being too hard on yourself. It's fine. Just take him to the other side of the hill." By criticizing himself first, clearly and completely, Carnegie took away the officer's entire reason to be harsh. This is the principle. When you know you're wrong, say so. Immediately, wholeheartedly, without hedging. It disarms the other person. It signals integrity. And it almost always produces a response that is far gentler than whatever you were bracing for. There is something in human nature that responds to genuine accountability with generosity. When someone refuses to make excuses, we find ourselves wanting to excuse them. Try it. It's counterintuitive, and it works almost every time. Principle 4. Begin in a friendly way. There is an old fable from Aesop, the wind and the sun. The wind and the sun were arguing about which of them was stronger. Below, a man was walking along the road in a heavy coat. The wind said, "I'll prove my strength. Watch me make him take off that coat." The wind blew, hard, harder. The man pulled his coat tighter. The wind blew harder still. The man bent into it and held on. Eventually, the wind gave up. Then the sun came out, warm, steady, patient. Within minutes, the man loosened his coat. Then he took it off completely. Warmth wins where force fails. Carnegie's principle is exactly this. When you approach someone with aggression, When you open a difficult conversation in confrontational mode, they instinctively pull their coat tighter. Their defenses go up. Their openness disappears. But when you begin calmly, warmly, as though you genuinely want to understand rather than defeat, something entirely different becomes possible. This is not weakness. Starting gently requires far more discipline than leading with anger. It is also far more effective. Principle 5. Get the other person saying yes, yes immediately. Joseph Allison was an insurance salesman who had learned to stop pitching. When he sat down with a potential client, he didn't open with rates or plans or features. He opened with, "You want to make sure your family is taken care of, no matter what happens to you, right?" "Yes." "And you'd agree that life insurance is one of the most reliable ways to do that?" "Yes." He kept building small, obvious agreements, each one true, each one undeniable. And with each yes, something shifted in the room. The client was no longer resisting. He was nodding along. He was already, in small ways, agreeing. By the time Allison got to the actual proposal, the client didn't feel sold to, he felt understood. This is called the Socratic method, and it works because of something simple about how the human mind commits. When someone says no, their entire system locks in. Pride, ego, identity, all of it aligns to defend that no. Reversing it feels like losing. But when someone has been saying yes, small yeses, gentle yeses, they are already moving in one direction. Continuing to move that way feels natural. It feels like their own choice. Before any important conversation, think, what are the things we already agree on? Start there. Build from common ground. Let the no never get said in the first place. Principle 6. Let the other person do a great deal of the talking. A mother had told her son to do his chores 100 times. She had explained, reminded, warned, and finally started demanding. Nothing worked. The resentment in the house was building. One afternoon, instead of telling him again, she sat down and asked, "Why?" Not as an accusation, as a genuine question. Her son looked up, surprised, and then started talking. Really talking. He said he felt like she never listened to him, that every conversation ended with her telling him what to do before he'd had a chance to say anything. She hadn't expected that. She sat with it. From that conversation forward, things changed. Not because she said something different, because for once, she let him say something. Carnegie's principle: people don't want to be lectured, they want to be heard. And the paradox is this: the more space you give someone to speak, the more they trust you. The more they trust you, the more open they become to what you have to say. Most people in a disagreement talk too much. They're so busy making their case that they never discover what the other person actually thinks. They miss the information that might have changed everything. Ask questions, then wait. Resist the urge to fill the silence. You'll be surprised what you learn, and you'll be surprised how much more willing people are to listen once they feel they've been heard. Principle 7. Let the idea feel like theirs. Mr. Wesson was a designer who had been trying for months to sell his sketches to a prominent New York stylist. Every pitch failed. Every presentation was rejected. So he tried something different. He brought in his newest sketches, unfinished, half done. And instead of presenting them, he handed them across the desk and said, "I'd love your input on these. How would you complete them?" The stylist picked them up, started making suggestions, adjusted this, rearranged that, got absorbed in the problem. When Wesson came back with the finished versions, completed exactly according to the stylist's suggestions, they were accepted without hesitation. Because now, they weren't Wesson's sketches, they were his. Carnegie's principle is not about deception, it's about understanding something real. People trust their own judgment more than anyone else's. They act on their own ideas with more energy and conviction than they act on ideas handed to them. So if you want someone to do something, involve them in shaping what that something looks like. Ask for their opinion. Let them contribute. Adjust based on what they say. The goal was always to get the thing done, not to get the credit. Choose accordingly. Principle 8. Dramatize your ideas. A newspaper was under attack. Critics were saying it had too many advertisements and not enough real content. The editorial team could have written a response. They could have published statistics defending themselves. Instead, they did something else entirely. They took every piece of non-advertising content from a single edition, every article, every feature, every column, cut it out, and had it bound into a book. 307 pages. They called it a day. They sold it for the same price as a newspaper. The critics had nothing left to say. The information in that book was the same information that had been in the paper all along. Nothing new. No new facts, no new arguments. But the way it was presented changed everything about how people experienced it. Carnegie's principle: sometimes the truth isn't enough. It needs to be felt. A dry report sits on a desk. A vivid story lives in someone's memory. When you need someone to understand something that matters, don't just tell them, show them. Find the example that makes it real. Find the image that makes it land. Facts inform. Emotion persuades. So now you know how to win people to your way of thinking, without arguing, without forcing, without making anyone feel like they lost. But there's one more layer, because knowing how to persuade is different from knowing how to lead. Part 4 is about leadership. Specifically, how to change someone's behavior, correct their mistakes, and guide them forward, without creating resentment, without damaging the relationship, and without them ever feeling pushed. 9 principles, and they might be the most useful ones in the entire book. Principle 1. Begin with praise before giving feedback. Imagine a colleague has spent 2 weeks writing a speech for an important conference. You read it. It's not right. It's too long, the tone is off, and it won't land well with that audience. You need to tell them. Most people, in that situation, lead with the problem. This is too long. The opening doesn't work. The whole section on page 3 needs to go. And technically, all of that might be true. But here's what happens when you open that way. The moment the other person senses criticism coming, their defenses go up. Their emotional armor locks into place. And even if your feedback is completely correct, it stops being received clearly, because they're no longer listening to your words, they're managing their feelings. Carnegie's principle is simple. Begin with genuine praise before you deliver difficult feedback. Not flattery, not a compliment designed to soften the blow before you twist the knife. Genuine recognition of something that is actually good about what they've done. Maybe it's the research behind it. Maybe it's the clarity of a specific section. Maybe it's the fact that they cared enough to try at all. Start there. Mean it. Then move to what needs to change. When someone hears something real and good about their work first, their defenses come down. They feel seen, not set up. And feedback that comes after genuine appreciation is received in an entirely different way than feedback that arrives cold. The message doesn't change, but the person who receives it does. Principle 2. Call attention to mistakes indirectly. A steel company executive was walking through his factory one afternoon when he spotted a group of workers standing beneath a large "no smoking" sign, every single one of them with a cigarette in hand. He could have pointed at the sign. He could have called them out in front of each other. He walked over, reached into his jacket, and pulled out a box of fine cigars. He handed one to each of them and said quietly, "I'd appreciate it if you gentlemen would enjoy those outside." They looked at the sign. They looked at the cigars. They understood perfectly. Nobody lost face. The message was delivered. And those men respected him more for how he handled it, not less. Carnegie's principle. When someone makes a mistake, point it out indirectly wherever you can. Preserve their dignity. Give them a way to correct course without feeling humiliated. There is also a smaller, practical application of this principle. One you can use in any conversation. Swap one word. Instead of, "You've been doing well this term, but your marks in maths need work," try, "You've been doing well this term, and if you put more focus into maths, I think you could do really well there too." Same information. The word "but" erases everything before it. The word "and" builds on it. One small shift, completely different feeling on the other side. Principle 3. Ask questions instead of giving orders. There's a particular kind of friction that happens when someone feels ordered around, even when the instruction is perfectly reasonable, even when the task itself is straightforward. Something about being told what to do, without being consulted, without being asked, creates quiet resentment. Carnegie's principle is not complicated. Ask instead of order. Instead of "fix this section," do you think this section could be stronger? What would you change? Instead of "have that done by Friday," do you think Friday is doable for this? The difference isn't just tone, it's ownership. When someone answers a question, when they contribute to a decision, they feel involved. They feel like the outcome belongs to them, at least in part. And when the outcome belongs to them, they work harder to see it through. Ask rather than tell. Consult rather than command. The result is the same. The relationship is entirely different. Principle 4. Praise every improvement, no matter how small. There was a boy who hated maths. He found it impossible. He felt stupid whenever he tried. His father decided to work through it with him using flashcard drills. Simple multiplication questions, timed. On the first night, it took him 52 minutes to get through the deck. His father didn't say, "That's far too slow." He said, "That's where we start. Let's beat it tomorrow." The next night, 48 minutes. His father celebrated it. 45, celebrated. 41, celebrated. Weeks later, the boy finished the deck in 8 minutes. Something he had been certain was beyond him, something he now did easily, almost automatically. None of it would have happened if the early slowness had been met with disappointment instead of encouragement. Carnegie's principle: praise every improvement. Not just the final result, the movement toward it. Psychologist Jess Lair wrote, "Praise is like sunlight to the human spirit. We cannot flower and grow without it." And yet most of us are far quicker to apply the cold wind of criticism than to give our fellow human beings the warm sunshine of praise. Don't wait for perfection before you acknowledge progress. Perfection is far away. Progress is happening right now. See it. Say it. Specifically. Not "good job," but "I noticed how much more patient you were in that situation today. That's not easy, and it made a difference." Specific praise signals attention, and attention is one of the most powerful things one person can offer another. Principle 5. Make the other person happy about doing what you suggest. Nobody likes being told what to do. Even when the request is reasonable, even when the task is simple, there is something in human nature that stiffens slightly at the word "must" and relaxes completely at the word "choose." Carnegie's final principle in this section is about the difference between compliance and willingness. Compliance says, "I did it because I had to." Willingness says, "I did it because I wanted to." The outcome may look identical from the outside, but only one of them builds a relationship. Here is how Carnegie frames it. Before you make any request of someone, ask yourself 5 things. What do they genuinely want? Not what you want, but what they want. What would make them feel valued in this situation? What would make saying yes feel like their choice, not yours? How does what you're asking align with what matters to them? And how can you frame it so they can see that alignment? A child who won't take out the rubbish without being nagged might do it cheerfully if it comes with a reason that matters to them, or a small reward that feels worth it. An employee who feels overlooked may transform entirely when a request is framed not as a task, but as a responsibility they've been trusted with. The mechanics aren't complicated, the discipline is. It requires you to stop thinking entirely about what you want and think first about what they want. When you get that right, the request almost makes itself. People work for money. They work harder for recognition. But they work hardest when they feel the work is theirs, when they want to do it, when they chose to do it, when the doing of it means something to them. Make them want it, and they'll surprise you every time. This book was written in 1936, almost 90 years ago. And the reason it still sells millions of copies every year, the reason it still changes lives, is not because Carnegie discovered something new. It's because he put into clear, plain language something that has always been true. Human beings want to feel important. They respond to warmth, not force. They act on their own ideas more than yours. They remember how you made them feel long after they've forgotten what you said. None of that has changed. None of it will. Carnegie's principles aren't tricks. They're not scripts to memorize or techniques to run on people. They're a way of paying attention, a habit of seeing the person in front of you, really seeing them, and treating them accordingly. So here is the only challenge I want to leave you with. Don't try to apply all 27 principles tomorrow. That's not how any of this works. Pick one, just one. Maybe it's replacing your first instinct to criticize with a genuine question. Maybe it's learning to remember the name of the next person you meet. Maybe it's listening, actually listening in a conversation where you'd normally be thinking about your reply. One principle, one day. See what happens. Because this is the thing about Carnegie's work that most people miss. It doesn't ask you to become a different person. It asks you to become a more attentive version of the person you already are. And that, quietly, gradually, in the small moments of ordinary life, is how relationships are built, how trust is earned, how people come to see you as someone they genuinely want in their corner. Knowledge without action is just entertainment. You now have the knowledge. The rest is up to you.